Welcome to EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a podcast for the advancement of educational effectiveness and equity across both traditional and non-traditional learning environments and experiences. I am your host for this episode, Jacob Easley II, PhD, PMP. Let's get into it. Welcome back to EdUp Accelerated Excellence. And today's guest is Dr. Margaret Terry Orr. She is a professor at Fordham University and is the EDD Program Director and Chair of its Division of Educational Leadership, Administration, and Policy. She has researched and published widely on leadership preparation approaches, the influence of preparation on leader practice, and school and district reform initiatives. And her current research focuses on rigorous performance assessment research and development in educational leadership nationally and internationally, as well as developing inquiry-oriented educational leadership using equity-focused improvement science to more effectively address intractable problems in schools and other educational institutions. Dr. Terry Orr, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jacob. I'm really glad to be here.
And we are glad to host you. So, as I mentioned in your introduction, you are known as an expert and you have contributed to the field of educational leadership broadly. Can you share with us the moment you began to consider the idea of engaging in improvement science as a research area?
Sure. As you've noted, I've been in the field of educational leadership and its preparation for over 30 years. And throughout that, I've always viewed leadership as an inquiry endeavor to discover and establish what works for whom and under what conditions. And as such, I've always taught program evaluation and action research as primary methodological approaches for scholarly practitioners and educational leaders. So my work with improvement science is a natural progression of this orientation. The actual specific time when I shifted it more specifically to improvement science began with an offer to participate as a university district partnership with the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and their 5-year Improvement Leadership Education Development Initiative. Through our convenings, we were exposed to and learned to apply improvement science principles to our partnership's shared problem of practice, which is how best to prepare and develop leaders for continuous improvement. Through this work, we and my colleagues at Fordham adopted improvement science as foundational for our doctoral preparation. And I now work with many school and district leaders in adapting improvement science to their practice. And we draw on the principles of improvement science for our own program's continuous improvement efforts.
You know, that's really interesting, this idea of learning from the field, it seems like. So first, I want to say I appreciate the approach of thinking about educational leadership as a practice of inquiry. So I really applaud that. And so what you're saying is that you went into the school district on this grant-funded initiative, and by learning from some of the practices outside of higher ed, brought them back to higher ed, specifically improvement sciences. So yeah, that's really interesting. The idea of learning from the practice and how practice are learning from the field and how the field can also influence how we think about teaching and learning and research at the university level.
I want to add that our practitioners were actually district leaders from 4 school districts, 2 in New York City and 2 outside. And by meeting together, we became each other's thought partners around this. And we actually had them give us feedback on our initial design for our doctoral program and even some of our courses to help think about what do leaders need to know and be able to do, and particularly in the inquiry part of the work, and then
Mhm.
how to apply that and to structure a dissertation in practice.
So, yeah, so creating a new form of, and in a way, it's almost synergy between
Right,
what you were already working on as inquiry in leadership, and how now might some practices learned from the field around improvement sciences
right.
influence work. So, improvement science is a relatively new field with its origins in healthcare and and the manufacturing sectors. With that said, it is even newer for the education profession. So, how would you describe the current climate for its use in the profession? So, how do you think higher ed is thinking about improvement science?
So you're right that it was developed as a quality improvement research in healthcare. And through that work has yielded many tools and protocols that are useful for supporting improvement science work. Within the field of education, improvement science has been adopted as the vehicle to foster continuous improvement, which is a little bit different because we're trying to improve systems, whereas in healthcare, they were trying to improve specific practices. Um, and as you know, with all the emphasis on school improvement, continuous improvement is really the primary expectation for all of public education and in higher education. That being said, many of the elements of improvement science are familiar to educators, particularly the notion of the plan, do, study, and act cycles of improvement. And as I said, there are aspects of program evaluation and action research that are parallel.
Yeah, so are you finding that in general, beyond your program, are you finding that education programs are using improvement science in their field? I guess you said it's more like the Plan, Do, Study Act, which we will talk, Plan, Do, Study Act cycle, which we will talk about in a bit. Um, but have you found that there be a uptake at this point?
Yes, very specific. The mechanism that's really accelerating the adoption of improvement science in higher education is coming through another Carnegie initiative, the Carnegie Project for the Education of Doctorate,
Hmm.
which has strongly emphasized developing scholarly practitioners in the dissertation and practice. And with the increased use of improvement science, they've really adopted it as the main methodology to support it, dissertations and practice, specifically for EDD programs. And so there are now well over 100 higher education institutions around the country that have improvement science as an anchor to their programs.
And that's through the Carnegie model for doctoral preparation.
Exactly.
Excellent. So, can you share a working definition of improvement science so that we're all on the same page at least at this point for this episode? And how does it compare to, for example, research on effectiveness, program evaluation, or something such as action research?
So that's a good question. And I actually Googled around to see like, well, how do other people define improvement science? And I was sort of surprised with where they would put the emphasis. Um, the best definition I could find is that it's a problem solving approach centered on continuous inquiry and learning. Through this, change ideas are tested in rapid cycles, resulting in efficient and useful feedback to inform system improvements. So, in terms of your question of like, well, how does it compare to research on institutional effectiveness and program evaluation and action research? Improvement For me, improvement science actually includes two kinds of inquiry. One is about the problem, and one is about the solution. It requires more unpacking about what the problem of practice is and pulling on available data or collecting new information to help understand the problem. with an emphasis on gaining perspective from what we call the user's perspective, those who really experience the problem, be it students or faculty. Um, but like action research, it is iterative in its problem solving and encourages working collaboratively with others. Like both, like program evaluation and action research, improvement science also is very context specific. It seeks to see the relationship between the problem solution and the context within which it exists so that you are tailoring your solutions to fit the particular context. Um, where it also where it differs somewhat is attention to explicitly surfacing assumptions about the current practice and the outcomes that it yields to really challenge us to think about if these problems that we have persist, we really need a new way to frame them and understand them to find workable solutions.
Leaders, entrepreneurs, and change agents looking for the opportunity to network and exchange ideas with other trailblazers and to further your brand. The 2.0 conference is for you. Experts from the fields of education, health, internet, marketing, and CXO are welcome to take part in the 2025 conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, March 4th through 6th. Reserve your space today and receive a 10% discount courtesy of EdUp Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUP10OFF. That's EDUP10OFF. Learn more and register online at www.the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUP10OFF.
So what I'm hearing is that latter part is this is a process that helps us to continually learn. So when we're thinking about improvement, it's really what do we know and what are the assumptions that we have about even the problem that we've posed, and within the context. So what are the conditions of the context relevant related to the problem itself as sort of the path to understand how to arrive at a solution that is appropriate for that context and the question.
That's correct. And it, like action research, it requires persistent to finding solutions that fit the problem, not being adhering to just one particular solution because you like it or you've used it before, but rather to keep being willing to abandon solutions if it doesn't work for your particular context and for the problem you're trying to solve.
And you mentioned a systems approach. So I'm assuming that that calls for engaging multiple stakeholders who are impacted or influenced by the problem and or the solution within the organization.
That's correct, because you first and foremost, it starts with the user perspective, trying to understand how the user experiences something. And we often in education, unlike business, rarely talk to our clients and try to find out, well, what is it that they experience? And then from that, it often gives us new light on the particular problem. But you can't make change if you don't involve all stakeholders in the change process. You have to help others see the problem differently as well. So it's important to start from the beginning with collaboration with those for whom the changes will likely have to impact. That is, if we want to create new experiences for students, it's going to be the teachers or faculty who have to change. So having them understand the problem and helping develop the solutions is critical. And then finally, our problems don't exist in a vacuum, nor do our solutions. We're impacted by other programs, policies, procedures, and so forth. And understanding how those come to bear and find solutions that fit within those particular contexts is critical.
So I like that. I like that underscoring of sort of systems or the potential for effectiveness at the systems level.
Right.
You mentioned this earlier, the Plan, Do, Study Act, but it is one of the most common tools for improvement science, and that's the cycle itself. And I would say, in some ways, it's procedurally linear and but is easy to conceptualize by a broad spectrum and a spectrum of stakeholders, particularly when that the group of stakeholders is diverse. But would you describe it as the basis for improvement science methodology, or is it often referred to, I'm sorry, because it's often referred to as a method. So is it really a method, or is that the basis of it, the crux of improvement science, or is there more to improvement science than the plan, do, study, act cycle?
So let's take apart the plan, do, study, and act cycle, and then also where it fits within improvement science.
Okay.
It is both a methodology and a framework. Because what it requires is for you to be explicit about what you're planning to change and to think in advance what's the evidence that the change has worked, particularly in the near term, because we're not going to wait like a whole year or 5 years to figure out if something works. We need to know in the near term. So that's at the planning level. Then we have the do part of it, which includes both the action of whatever solution is that we've implemented, as well as the collection of evidence around it. We're great in education in doing the first two, planning and doing. We're terrible in the other two areas. We rarely then sit down to look at the evidence to say, what have we learned about this strategy? We typically rely on intuition and our kind of gut reaction, like, oh, this is working, this is not. But we really need to stop and spend time to look at the evidence. And because we're involving others in this process, have them look at the evidence too, for them to make decisions about what's working and what's not working and under what conditions. And then the last, the act phase of it, we also tend to give short shrift. And improvement science emphasizes it's important to be really declarative about what have you learned from this? What are you going to continue, which is adopting? What are you going to change, or maybe adjust to make things better? And what are you going to abandon because you find that it doesn't work? But the cycle doesn't end there, because it's supposed to, as a continuous improvement process, feed into a new cycle. You either think about what you want to rerun because you've learned things in the first go round that you want to tinker with and improve, or your experience may uncover other things you had not thought about. So you may find that your intervention is necessary but insufficient, and you need other elements to add to it. You start off by asking, though, is this the crux of improvement science? And if you recall, I mentioned there are actually two kinds of inquiry with improvement science, one around the problem and one around the solution. The plan, do, study, act cycle is most effective in supporting the work around investigating the solution. But we still need the inquiry process around the problem. And that, as you've mentioned, takes a systems perspective. We not only do we pull out the data that helps us see the extent to which a problem exists, we then look for data on what are the factors that cause the problem. You've probably heard the saying that our systems are perfectly designed to get the results that we have. So what is that design? What are those features that are yielding the results that we have? And we use something called a fishbone diagram to help illustrate that and organize what that system is.
I think that's interesting. As I hear you talk, I'm thinking around project management in some ways, and I'm also thinking around design thinking, because
Right.
I'm hearing a lot of the similar language in how you approach a project. So you talk about both the understanding the problem and the solution,
Right.
and I think that's quite attractive.
Well, let me build on what you said about design thinking, because in our program and in our approach, we actually pulled in a lot from design thinking. What I've found in the work around improvement science is the emphasis on the problem and testing a solution. But then the question comes, how do you get to the solution? Understanding the problem is only part of it. And finding a way to actually get to something innovative that fits the context requires the steps of design thinking, which you need to be able to go through brainstorming with others to think about how to building on what is different, needs to be different, and then also iterating on possible solutions, investigating what others use, investigating what's available in the research literature, learning to do thought experiments so that you can come up with solutions that best fit what your context needs.
And empathy, because as you mentioned, understanding how stakeholders, and that could be throughout the system, experience not necessarily perhaps the problem, but what is their experience en route towards what that solution might be.
Yes, and we encourage all our students to learn to do empathy interviews, whenever I do professional development on improvement science, we always make empathy interviews a critical part because it really opens up people's thinking, because they can no longer hold on to their assumptions about why a problem exists, because they're getting direct evidence about other factors that may be contributing.
So this is intriguing. So to walk us through an empathy interview, what does it look like, or what might it feel like?
So an empathy interview is an attempt to try to get as close to the user's experience as possible. So you want to be able to ask them not evaluative questions, but experiential questions.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know what their typical experience is like, or what they might do when faced with particular challenges. So if we think in the K-12 level, I've had several students who've been working on supporting their special education students in doing math word problems. And one of the things is to find out from the students, like, what do you do when you don't know how to solve a problem? Who do you turn to? And we also ask them, like, what's a time when it worked well? And what's a time when it didn't work well? Again, trying to go to their direct experience so that you can understand, like, where does their difficulty arise? Because you ask them if you like math, you know what the answer is you're going to get. And when you ask them, like, well, what kind of problems do you like to work on? It's not going to give you any more insight. But asking them to describe their lived experience really yields insightful information.
Yep, that's really important.
Experts from the fields of education, health, internet, marketing, and CXO are welcome to take part in the 2025 2.0 conference in Las Vegas, Nevada, March 4th through 6th. Reserve your space today and receive a 10% discount courtesy of EdUp Accelerated Excellence with the code EdUp10OFF. That's EdUp10OFF. Learn more and register online at www.the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EdUp10OFF.
In your experience, how has it improved, or how has improvement science led to greater effectiveness in either your work or the work of those you work with through research projects or consultancies and so on and so forth?
So I've seen a huge improvement in schools and districts where my students have used it, or where I've worked with principals and assistant principals on continuous improvement. The first is they've been able to narrow their focus around this very specific problem and then find solutions for that problem. And by keeping a sustained focus on the problem, they actually get to the improvement point where they actually are getting results that demonstrate that what they're doing is making a difference. But because they're doing it in teams with their teachers and other staff, it shifts the way in which they work together. They've become more distributed in their leadership work, where they are engaging their staff to take on more responsibility, and to become more of the drivers in the change process. They become more data based in their planning and decision making and problem solving. They also change the culture of their schools and districts to enable more risk taking because they all are approaching this like we don't have a solution here. We need to figure this out together. Let's try something. It may not be perfect, but by going through the cycles of the PDSA cycles, you can try out ideas as works in progress. So it encourages people to say, okay, it's all right to do it wrong. It's all right to make mistakes because that's something I can learn from. So for the students I've worked with and also with the schools in which I've worked, the elements of improvement science have become part of their leadership practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's also shifted the culture of the school, not only with the group of people with whom they work, but others who see the work happening and ask to be part of it. Ask if they can also have similar focus support around a problem of practice. So it becomes transformational.
That's beautiful. How often have you had folks come in and say, I want to sort of help solve this problem? Remember, there are often environments where folks sometimes sit on their hands because they may have an idea, but once you bring the idea up, the leader will often say, "Great, now can you lead it?"
Right.
So, what I'm hearing though is this helps with not only skills of helping individuals to learn differently, but mindsets.
Right.
So a couple of things that are undergirded: risk, collaboration, which I think are very important. So when folks are less risk averse in a collaborative environment, they feel safe to try out something that is new. Um,
And and to look at the mistakes.
oh, that's true too. That's true. So as
Which,
you were talking about this, I had in my head pictures of multiple PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act cycles happening at the same
right.
time. So sort of potentially a larger question around improvement science for the organization. But as you mentioned earlier, you can have smaller groups that stumble upon another issue or concern or problem and want to investigate that as part of leading to the larger research question, so to speak. So is that plausible?
Yes, it is plausible. Um, I'll give you an example. I had one principal who was working in a special education school and realized that all teachers needed to be teaching reading to the it was elementary school level. Um, and the teachers were special ed trained and they said, we're not trained to teach reading. And her view was everybody has to teach reading. And so she took them through a learning process, but also as part of that embedded trauma informed instructional practices. So they were learning different ways to work with the children, along with learning how to teach reading. And because she did it in this safe environment, that it's like we're figuring this out together. They didn't feel like they were being evaluated. They felt like they were being supported. And by doing it as a group, they could feed off each other in terms of giving feedback, doing intervisitations, looking at the curriculum together. And at the end of it, she saw significant improvement in the reading performance of the students. But then other teachers came in and said, hey, we want to do this in math. So it was like,
That's beautiful.
so she was able to have the first group keep going and now shifted as to have another group take on something else.
If I were the principal of that school, that would really excite me to now hear faculty in a different discipline area seeking to learn more about an initiative that perhaps was launched to address a different challenge in a different content area. So that would be really great. And this reminds me of that question of other teams wanting to join,
Right.
having a better problem.
Right.
So, we have problems and then we have what we call better problems or
Right.
optimal.
Right.
So, given this a large sort of stepping back and looking at a large view or worldview of improvement science, what differences, if any, have you seen between improvement science and education compared to other professions, and what can be learned from those comparisons?
I'm not too familiar with how it's done in other professions. Although I've noticed, I don't know if you've been to a hospital lately, but you see evidence of continuous improvement. You'll see charts on the wall and uh, various practices that are exemplify improvement efforts. Where I see the difference in education is the organizational conditions are very different. And there are so many constraints around what people can do. Um, and getting people to work together cannot be mandated in the same way where you might require it, say, in a hospital or in a business. And so it requires more encouraging and asking people to try something out to make a difference in a particular area. It also, I think, because we do experience such turnover in schools, it becomes hard to sustain because it is such a learning process to take on. And then there's so many mandates that come from the federal government and from the states and even local districts that threaten the continuity of that kind of improvement work.
I can definitely see that happening. I say that education is more of an open system.
Right.
Yet at the same time, I think we are a siloed system. We've adopted some of the practices of industry sort of to mechanize or create structures where we're all sort of cogs within, this a big performing machine. So you do this one thing, you teach math, and that's
Right.
it. But even in higher education, because, if you think about all of us who've gotten our dissertations, we, that's very lonely work that you do on your dissertation. Even if you're in the field collecting field work, you're
Right.
doing it by yourself. You may come back and have a thought group discussion with other folks, but the work is yours and you often do it by yourself. And then we are told that you are an expert in this area and you're hired at a university and you're hired for a very specific strand often, but not not considering folks who have dual appointments in
Right.
multiple departments. But we aren't necessarily trained in sort of this way of working in groups, working in cycles. So we're very solitary creatures in terms of our research, which is different from, let's say, medical research, where folks often work in teams and teams often across continents,
Right.
different data samples. And you can look at the list of when folks publish, there may be sometimes 10 or 15 authors on a publication versus in education. I think we're getting better at it, but and I think that system of the individual not only permeates higher ed, but also K-12.
I like your example there about medical research because I wish education would get to that kind of publication. Because in medicine, they'll work on one little strategy or one little mechanism for improvement and publish the articles, and they have a way of doing quick publications. In education, we don't focus enough on what are the specific mechanisms that make a difference in learning. And improvement science allows that kind of work. I wish we would get to the level where we publish that then so that other people can learn from the kind of specific things, like the example I gave you, what the principal did to engage the teachers to want to learn to teach reading to their special education students.
Right. So that's really part of the podcast is to share information. And
Right.
so that's something that we can definitely think about for a future episode is what are you learning and sort of discrete uh, problems or challenges and mechanisms, and then how those can then inform the larger systems approach. And so I like this idea of um, focusing on equity in that sense that where a school is now using improvement science to improve the skills of teachers to be able to teach reading from a different trained discipline area, that being special education. So how would somebody who may be interested in engaging in improvement sciences in education, how might they go about to learn more?
So, of course, I could say, you want to come to our program and take courses in it.
Absolutely.
Uh,
You can, okay to, it's okay to talk about your program at Fordham.
right. So certainly we have a doctoral program at Fordham University in educational leadership, where improvement science is the cornerstone of our program. But there are actually a lot of online training opportunities available. The Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching annually offers workshop through their Carnegie Summit, which they host annually. And the sessions are all built around the use of improvement science in continuous educational improvement. And then the University of Michigan has a free online course, and there's also something called the Improvement Collective, which offers online courses. Um, I think it's better to come to a program.
You know, and I think it's important to understand how individuals learn.
Right,
So some folks need a bit more collaborative and structured and or a structured approach.
right.
Others can, in some ways, have easier uptake on their own. But I'm going to go back to something you mentioned earlier when you think about improvement science, and particularly for systems, is it is a collaborative approach. So I don't believe that this is something that can be done in a siloed manner,
Right.
and and can't be done well, at least in a siloed manner. But what projects are on the horizon for Terry Orr?
Oh, well, thank you. So actually, I've been very interested in the leadership angle of improvement science. How have school and district leaders shifted their practice, intentionally or otherwise, to support their improvement work, and what works well and what doesn't? So I've been working with a group of graduates on doing case studies about their own projects, that we hope to publish as a book. And we're also doing a cross case analysis of that. And then I've been doing survey research with our students to learn more about how have their skills and practices shifted in what they've learned about using improvement science. So I hope to have a couple of articles coming out soon that help to illustrate that.
Well, Terry Orr, Dr. Terry Orr, thank you so much for allowing us to learn with and from you here at EdUp Accelerated Excellence. And we will definitely be on the lookout for some of your new work. And we want to hear from some of your graduates of your doctoral programs to see, the impact that the doctoral program at Fordham is having on the profession through the use of improvement science that focuses on equity, for sure.
I would love to share that with you.
Thank you for engaging with the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community. You can find this episode and others on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Music. And if you like this episode, please don't forget to follow us and share within your network.